Okay, welcome back to Behind the Songs, the Grammy Museum Experience Prudential Center's online chat and performance series with artists, songwriters, and producers discussing the stories behind some of our favorite songs. I'm your host, Mark Conklin. I'm also the Director of Artist Relations and Programming at the Grammy Museum Experience. Our guest today is multi-platinum pop sensation Melanie Martinez. She recently debuted her 7-track EP, After School, which is also included as part of the deluxe version of her Billboard Award nominated and internationally acclaimed album K through 12. We're going to discuss some songs from her different projects, going all the way back to Crybaby and all kinds of things. Melanie, welcome to Behind the Songs. It's so good to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, first thing I would just ask you is just in general how things are right now for you with, the COVID world and things. How have you been able to be as creative as you've wanted to be? I would imagine you normally would have been touring this summer.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have more time to write music and work on my next record, which is exciting for me, but I obviously miss touring and performing. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword, you know, but yeah, creatively, I feel like I've been just, kind of having like on and off blocks of like, sometimes I'll be more stuck and like lyrically can't really think of anything. Sometimes I can't think of things melodically, and then sometimes I'm just like, I should just take a break, live life, and absorb the information that I'm kind of witnessing around me, and then be able to go back in and like put down what it is that I'm experiencing into music and art. So yeah.
I know most of your music feels very personal, but I was curious from a writing standpoint, is there ever a time where you're kind of thinking more like a fiction writer? I mean, don't get me wrong, there's fictional elements obviously, but are you ever
Of
kind of
course, yeah.
from way outside writing stories, or is it usually mostly through personal?
It's definitely both. It's like a mix of both. Like what I love about having the opportunity to create through a character's lens is that I'm able to express my own emotions and the things that I'm feeling, but in a very heightened way, and through a different character's lens. So there's different storylines that Crybaby would be going through, and I get to talk about, so many different topics that so many different people who are listening can resonate with and relate to in a more specific way to them and their own story, but also be able to express my own emotions, through that character as well. So it's really fun for me to be able to create stories, but also I like adding in the personal kind of elements as well.
So tell us about Crybaby, kind of how that comes about, how the genesis of the idea. Do you recall the first time you had this thought of this was, the concept that you had? Do you remember when that was?
Yes, so I feel like it was kind of this gradual development of me figuring out this character, and it was based off of my own sensitivity that I felt as a kid. I felt very much like I don't know. I guess like a lot of people describe, or ascribe themselves to be like an empath. I really resonate with that, feeling the emotions in a room. When I walk into a room, I can feel all the energy and like feel they're really weighed down by it, or if it's a positive, I feel more towards that direction. So I just wanted to, create a character that expressed, the true essence of who it is that I am and how sensitive I am, but also be able to create these stories that were new ideas and concepts that were, things I was observing in the world that weren't necessarily something I was going through at that time. But I think it's interesting, like looking back, the way that I write music in general, songs, ideas, concepts is always from beginning to end. So I think it's interesting that with my first record, I started with, the beginning of Crybaby's existence, or the beginning of a character's existence in the world, like from the moment she was born. And then, K through 12 following that is like her growing in the world, and then being able to introduce these characters to expand that world. And just kind of naturally, I think my albums will follow that progression from beginning to end and continue to evolve that way. So I think my brain just works in a very linear way when I write.
So do you have, um, certainly maybe through K through 12 it might have been a little bit different than Crybaby because it does have this kind of storyline. Did you have like a the titles in mind, like this is how it's going to go, and then have to kind of fill in the holes, or are you writing songs and
Yeah,
then putting them together?
It was more like, I stuck with, wanting to write about nostalgia with Crybaby, and I would go back into my childhood inspirations and write down a bunch of titles that were influenced, or these ideas that I was able to pull from my childhood, these topics or titles, or kind of like, I would say, like, if it's like a cake, it's like the titles are like the sugar coated frosting on top, and then the actual theme of the topic that I was talking about was much more adult, because I wanted to write about topics that I was observing as I was growing into my adulthood, and the things I was witnessing. So there's kind of this duality between, the title, which was very like, childlike, and this facade, like I said, and then, behind it, there was this like deep, dark layer of like, just, just a storyline that, I guess, were just based off observations and things I was experiencing, and whatnot. So I really like contrast. So it's a challenge, and it's really fun to write like that.
How much does it change? Does it the things that you put down in that initial kind of draft of where you think the titles are going to be? Does that pretty much the way it lands, or over time do you kind of evolve it, and does it kind of take on a different turn?
It's like, I guess my process is mostly like writing out a bunch of titles within the theme. So I would just write down a bunch of titles, and then I would go into the studio or start with a voice memo with a melody, find a chord progression that I really like, and keep that on loop for forever, and sit in a corner and just write the song from beginning to end. And would use that title in a very clear way, where like the title would be this metaphor for whatever topic or thing I was talking about. So, for example, with Mrs. Potato Head, like, I thought that it was really interesting, like with the Mrs. Potato Head toys, like, the concept of it is that you can rearrange and customize the pieces on a Mrs. Potato Head to change the face. And I easily could relate that to, the trend of plastic surgery, and just like observing that trend, and kind of the conditioning that society and media kind of pushes on me and my generation, with just, like constantly wanting to look a certain way to be accepted or whatnot. I fully support people doing whatever it is that they, feel comfortable with their body. So it was less about like, a judgment, but more just like an observation, from that kind of place of just witnessing just a trend or this thing. But again, it's like, it's so fun to like find these like metaphors to be able to like talk about these serious topics or things that are in existing in the world.
When did you first know that you kind of had this gift of putting words and music together? Like, that moment of realization that this was like, some people call it their, I think it was Springsteen said it was his superhero trick or something that he had. Like, when did you first know that you had that?
I don't know. I think like I would write poetry a lot as a kid, and that was something I was super into. I also loved just painting and doing little crafts and stuff, or photography, things like that. So I was always really into the arts. But I think when I was like 14 is when I wanted to like get into playing guitar. And so I taught myself how to play guitar using like chord diagrams online, and like just YouTube tutorials and whatnot, and then started pairing my poetry that was also like very visual, or just, I loved using metaphors, and just, using like really interesting visual themes to represent an underlying story that was much deeper or larger. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just started pairing the two when I was like 14, 15. And then as I got older, like I would say 17, 18 is when I started really discovering like what it is that I wanted to do, or the path that I wanted to take as an artist and a songwriter. So, yeah.
It's I'm curious. I know visually, obviously, you have obviously a certain aesthetic that you've done. You're directing films now and things, so you obviously that's a gift for you, and you use a lot of imagery in your lyrics. So, there's it's an emotion. Obviously, it's emotional. It's a song, but at the same time, it's not always just how I feel. You're using a lot of images to do that. So,
Mhm.
how much of that comes from film? But I'm also curious. Do you read a lot? You know, if so, are there certain things that have kind of like, you know, been inspiration for you and focused your lyric writing even more?
Um, well, I think that everything collectively that I have, liked, listened to, or um, even seen in just passing in my life, like has influenced me in some way, shape, or form, whether it was subconscious or not. But I think visually, like I could think, I think I could name my biggest visual influences probably like Mark Ryden's artwork, and like Nicoletta Cecily. Those are like my two favorite just artists, visual artists. And then as far as like reading, I mean, like, yeah, I think like whatever I'm into reading, it kind of influences. I wasn't really reading many books during the Crybaby process of like writing the album for K through 12, really, but right now I am, for my next record. And I don't really want to give away too much of that since it's
Sure.
obviously it's
Right.
probably going to be, I don't know when it's going to come out because I'm still working on the script for
Right.
the film and the album and whatnot. So, but I'm finding more that like books are now influencing my work more so than they were before. But I think, before I was more inspired by just visual art.
Tell me a little about your collaboration process. Obviously, you're working with a producer, I guess occasionally a co-writer as well. Um, how has that been for you? Was that an easy transition? You know, when you come from a like your kid doing a singer-songwriter thing, and suddenly,
Yeah.
you know, there's
Yeah,
people in the room.
co-writing is still hard. I have to
Yeah.
say, co-writing is still very difficult for me because, and the only person that I co-write with now is Jeremy, Kinetics and One Love, and I really enjoy writing. I'm actually writing with him now for my next album. And like, I would say the difference is this: K through 12, a lot of it I wrote just like, the lyric and melody alone. And usually this is how I write. After school, I wrote that way as well, where I just sat in a corner and from beginning to end would just like write it on my own. And then once I was done figuring it out, I would get on the mic and record it, and that would be it. And so this time, it's kind of like going back to the Crybaby days where I'm like working with Jeremy again, and we're like throwing these ideas back and forth. And sometimes, like he's so amazing at being able to be like, just think of things on the spot right away, and like we'll just say it. And I'm the type of person who's I have an internal process where I need to like sit alone and like think to myself and like
Right.
plan it out before I like say it, because I get nervous saying things. I feel like I have to really like figure it all out prior. So he's really amazing to work with because he gives me that space to be able to figure it out on my own, and also bring in ideas that really are crucial to making the story that much better. So I really like that type of process where people still like give me that space, but like are also able to contribute really awesome ideas that help the story.
That's always the balance, right? Of knowing when to keep quiet almost, you know,
Yeah,
when just like
for sure. Yeah,
sit in a room, sit in a room and think with somebody. Um,
yeah.
do you are you always thinking of concepts when you're writing now, like project wise, or are you ever just sitting down and going like, I have this song idea, I think this is a great title, and or is it always within the context of a concept now?
It's always within the context of a concept. Like right now, I have this concept, or it's really more so like a film idea, or it's a movie that I have in my head, and I'm on like page 50, but I'm probably gonna have to revisit those 50 pages over and over and over again until I figure it out. But yeah, I'm in this place of just having this general map. So what I have in the studio right now, for example, is we have this whiteboard, and we'll just, I'll write out like from, track 1 to track 13, just like every feeling that I want to convey in each song, what the song should, um, you know, uh, sound like, what the song should generally be about, because it's going to fit a part in the film that I have planned in my head. So it's like I'm kind of like simultaneously working on the film and working on the album, when before I only worked on the album first and then made the film after. So this is a different process for me
Right.
altogether, which is exciting, but everything new is kind of daunting and can be a little intimidating. So
And when you're in this when you're working in the studio, different vocalists have different feel. You know, some people like to be kind of coach through and having somebody going, working them, going, try this, try that. Are you more that, or do you more kind of like, I know what I need to do, just let me do this and see how, you know?
I'm more like I know exactly what I need to do. Like
Right.
even like I kind of describe my recording process as like going through these different characters. Like I'm the type of person who will do like just 100 takes like over and over and over again, but it's only because I'm like trying to find this character tone in my voice that fits the exact feeling that I'm trying to give off in the song. Um, so it's like finding that character. And once I find it, and once I'm actually in the pocket, then it's there, and it's like I know exactly what it is. I love comping vocals too. Like I'm really kind of yeah, I'm into that process for sure.
Editing. You were talking about writing, and you said that you 50 pages and you'll have to revisit. Is it a
Mhm.
different process writing for you, songs versus, say, scripts? Let's say, where do you go
Yeah.
back and revisit songs a lot, or does it more flow out of you, and you're like, this is kind of where it is when it's done?
That's yeah, they're very different. Like the script writing is more like, I'm constantly having to revisit and kind of figure out the details. And then with songwriting, I feel like, I have a hard time going back to songs. I usually just like writing it from beginning to end, then and there, because sometimes when I go back, I'm not in that same exact energy or emotion that I was feeling that day when I was putting, all of that information down. So when I go back, I'm almost like in a different place, and it feels a little like scattered. But I do that sometimes where like, oh, I don't like, the way this bridge sounds, or I just don't have a bridge. I have to write a bridge. That's usually the case where I like skip the bridge because the bridge feels like such a departure anyway, that I like coming back to it because I am in a different energy, and that kind of gives that feeling in a bridge where you're like, we're taking off into this other place.
And harmonies. Now you do a lot of very interesting, intricate harmonies. Was that always a thing for you? Was that something as a kid that you learned, or is that something you developed later on when you were in the studio?
That was something that naturally I just, when I started recording, and I'd be like, okay, like, let's just keep recording more things, like any background vocals or whatever. It was harmonies or whispers. A lot of the time,
Right.
I'll like layer in these like whispers and stuff just to give it more texture. I don't know, I love that stuff.
And
But
or sneezing in the
but
nurse's
yeah, I don't
office. You
know the
weren't
harmony.
sneezing. That wasn't you, was it?
No, no, but I love,
Okay.
yeah, those type of sounds. Yeah. Yeah, I love things like that. I love bringing in any way that I can make a song more visually like stimulating, like where people can hear it and know exactly what's happening in the story. Like Nurse's Office obviously did that with the coughing, the sneezing, the peeling off of the Band-Aid. Um, Wheels on the Bus in K through 12, we did that with the vehicle sounds, the bus sounds, with it driving, the windshield wipers, the door opening. Show and Tell, we did that with the crank on the marionette box or the chains to signify, being like kind of held down or controlled. There's so many. I mean, it's like orange juice, like the juice sounds, the squeezing of the orange sounds. Recess, the like swinging or like the chattering of like the kids in the courtyard type of vibe, like all that type of stuff is so fun to incorporate into music.
And I was curious about that, about where you get a lot of these sounds, not where necessarily, but like, because I've learned not to ask people where they get their sounds. It's always a bad thing. They don't want it. No one wants to give it away. But but I'm curious because there's so many like the the child's musical toy sounds. And I just
Mhm.
can't picture you like running through the garage sales looking for the little tinky things that make the children's noise. Do you do
During
this?
Crybaby, sometimes
Did you?
during Crybaby, sometimes we would, yeah. And even
Okay.
now, I mean, like if we have like a cool little, thing that makes a cool sound, we'll sample it or use it or try to do something with it. But yeah, Crybaby process was very much like that actually. Like we even had moments where, I mean, there's some songs that are obviously unreleased songs or whatever, but there's this one song that we made where we went to the 99-cent store. It was called 99-cent store, was the song. So we went to the 99-cent store that day and we grabbed a bunch of toys and that like, lit up and made these weird sounds and whatever. And we like used them in the song, and it sounded really cool, but it didn't make the final album just because of story and whatnot. but it was a cool song. So yeah, I like doing things like that. I think it's really fun.
That's interesting. How often do things, the proverbial cutting room floor in music? How often do you find that you have songs that just for whatever reason don't make the cut, and maybe you still like them, but they won't see the light of day necessarily?
Yeah, I'm pretty like decisive. Like I feel like I usually know when usually I say usually because after school was kind of a different process, but with Crybaby I was very sure of like the songs that I wanted to be on the album because I was piecing together the songs in a storyline. So I needed to make sure that it fit together and that it told a story and it wasn't like kind of just a bunch of songs thrown together, you know. So um, it depends. Like K through 12 as well. Like after writing the songs, I pieced together the storyline and then wrote the film, which then kind of expressed more of what that storyline was. So, but after school was very different because it's an EP. So, it wasn't this like since it was kind of like a second part to K through 12, I had like so many extra songs laying around that I was like, oh no, but maybe this song. I'm like, oh, but I really love this song, and I can only fit it into 7 songs. So I was like, oh, this is so hard. But the last minute songs that were almost not going to make it on after school were Glued and Field Trip. Those were the two that I was like kind of toggling between other songs still. But I was like, I'm just gonna do it because I felt a gut feeling. So I'm happy I did now.
It worked out pretty well. Now we'll come to K through 12, but interestingly, Playdate is had this resurgence, and I know all of the stuff that's happened like with TikTok and things like that. Has that been like kind of this cool surprise for you to see that 5 years later, like it's suddenly, I mean, it was very successful at the
Totally.
beginning, but
Yeah.
but now even more so. I mean, that has
Yeah.
to
It
be
was it was an amazing surprise.
yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
It was definitely like a little gift at my doorstep on a random day. It was really cool. So I'm really happy that people are resonating with that song even 5 years later. Like that's really
Right.
cool.
Um, Tell me, we get into K through 12 now. When you're creating this, you're thinking already you're going to do the movie, or are you thinking I'm doing this and I want to do a movie? Like how do those two come together?
K through 12 was like it was an interesting process with discovering that I wanted to make a movie because at first I was, even with Crybaby, I wanted to technically make this bigger, piece of visual film um, for the album, but I didn't have, obviously I was a new artist that just signed to the label. So, and most artists are only allowed like 2 music videos per album cycle. So like trying to even convince them to make another music video and another music video, another, it was just like, I was able to make 13 music videos, but again, that took over the course of years. Like it took
Right.
time to be able to write these treatments and be able to, like just see if I could even shoot them. And so we were able to do that. And then after doing 13 videos, I was like, you know what? I really just want to make just one body of work that's like you can watch from beginning to end and hear all of the music within it and have the story laid out in a very clear way. And I'm like, that's a film. So I'm going to make a film because it seems like the best way to tell the story. So with K through 12, I wrote the album and then I was like, yeah, I think I'm just going to go for it. I think I'm just going to make it into a film. And luckily, Atlantic was super supportive with that idea, and they really pushed me to continue to just kind of, let myself tap into that creative energy and use it to make something that I had never made before. I'm really happy that they were, down for it because it was definitely a very intense process and they stuck with me through it all, and I'm just super grateful.
I was going to ask you that. There's always the rub of art and commerce, of putting these two things
Mhm.
together. And for someone like you, who is obviously such an artist and has been even from the early days, it was obvious even in the, when you were first coming out. How hard is that to balance that you wanted to be successful? Obviously, you want many people to hear it, but at the same time saying, yeah, but I'm not going to make certain songs a certain way just to appeal to whatever. Like, how has that been as a process for you as you're kind of going through your process now and getting older and making music?
I think when I was younger, obviously, my first album, I wasn't thinking about any of that at all because I was just like, I just want to make this concept. And I was just kind of writing every day to try to gather this idea together to be able to make my first project. And so, um, and even with K through 12, yeah, I guess I just don't really think about what I'm supposed to be doing or what people expect of me. Like I feel like it's really important, when to be sure of your vision, and to stick with it and to just express yourself the way that you want to express yourself, because at the end of the day, like when I die, like I'm gonna look back at my work and I want to be proud of the work that I put out there. I don't want to ever have a moment where I look at a song and I'm like, oh, I only did that to appease the label, or to try to open myself up to a specific audience or whatever. It's like, it's okay that my audience is specific, and they're very similar to me. I definitely see myself in a lot of these young kids who listen to my music, and I think that's really special. When you express yourself authentically, it attracts people who are on that same vibration or frequency, and then you create this energy together where you're now playing at shows, and all these people who resonate with the music are in their feelings in this very intense and deep way, just like you were when you wrote it, or just like you are when you're performing it. So I think it's really really important to stick to who you are authentically, because it attracts people who resonate with that.
How has your process changed, at least studio wise? Has it changed, like from Crybaby to K through 12? Um, are you different in the studio? Are you faster? Or do you kind of like know where you want to go? Like, how has that evolved for you?
mm, I think it's just different every time. Like some days I'll go in the studio, and this has always been the case, like even during the Crybaby writing process, where I'll go in the studio, and some days I'm just like, my brain isn't really working. Like I can't think of anything. Like it's like no melodies want to come out, like no lyrics, or nothing is happening in my brain. Head empty, like just completely. And so and then in those moments, like if I'm working with people that I've worked with for so long, like Kinetics One Love, or Michael Keenan, like um, we'll just like end up watching a movie that ends up inspiring us, and then the next session we think of something really interesting, and without that moment to breathe and to just collect our thoughts and to let ourselves be inspired by something that we haven't seen before, or maybe something we have seen before a million times, but we're just wanting to watch it again for some sort of spark of inspiration. Like I think those moments are really important for the writing process.
Did you ever feel pressure, like, man, after you got signed, like, I've got to get something here. I've got it. Was there ever that early on? Did you have that and kind of grow out of it, or were you always kind of okay with letting it be?
I was always pretty much okay with letting it be, like I'm very critical of myself, so I do feel like the pressure doesn't come from other people per se. It comes more from myself, where like, even if I could write a song in a session and everybody in the room will be like, that sounds amazing, or the other person will be like, that's amazing, and I'm like, you know what, like it's not visual enough, or it doesn't tell the exact story that I was going for. I'm very hard on myself, so I think like I kind of have this standard in my own head, that has nothing to do with what other people place on me, but more so just what I feel and hear and think and see. Like, uh, and if I don't meet that standard in my head, I'm very hard on myself. So
Right. Um,
yeah,
I mean, you're an artist, right? That's the whole. That's
yeah,
the blessing and the
that's it.
curse.
Yeah,
uh,
definitely.
uh, what was sonically? What were you between the two when you got to K through 12? Was there a new something you were looking for different in, and how did, if so, how did you achieve that? Like, what was the method of getting to what you wanted to hear?
Um, I think adding the visual elements, K through 12 was way more visually, like we added a lot more kind of Foley movie type sounds, in K through 12. So I think that kind of was the progression. I love doing that now. I feel like that's like just a big part of my music now. But also, yeah, sonically, I mean, obviously with Crybaby, I leaned more towards toy sounds and any sounds that would spark nostalgia or bring me back to my childhood. And with K through 12, it was more about school. So I obviously wanted to have things like the pencils hitting the desks, you know, like those little moments here and there to make you feel like you're in the environment of school. And then with my next record, I will do the same, you know, the same kind of thing where whatever the theme is, I will cater to that theme sonically
And
and lyrically and melodically.
and without giving too much away, but is it safe to say that the character continues on and there are other adventures, or can we not even say? You tell me. I'm going to take that as a
um,
yes, but no.
let's just say Crybaby evolves. That's all I will
Okay,
say is that Crybaby evolves.
there you go. And the newest EP, After School. Now it's very interesting because it is stands alone, and yet it's also obviously part of the deluxe version of K through 12. Um, do you feel that's? I think you said it. Is it kind of a part two, kind of an addendum, I guess, to the K through 12 project?
It's a part two in the concept, but not in the storyline because there isn't a storyline in the After School EP. It's more so, you know, just a collection of songs that I wrote during those 3 years of discovering myself and understanding certain life lessons that were being thrown my way and expressing the lessons, even if it was subconsciously. Like, I think when I wrote Glued, like, I didn't even really remember. That session was so like, we just were kind of like messing around and we're like, oh, I'm just gonna, put these lyrics down. I wasn't thinking super critically of Glued, but it happened. And then when I looked back at it, I was like, wow, like this is very much, a lesson I'm dealing with right now. The lesson of detachment and attachment. Not being too attached because you can get hurt, and then not being too detached because then you don't feel any depth of love whatsoever. So, that kind of healthy detachment, healthy attachment, those kind of things. It was just like more personal. Like, this is the first time I ever put out a project, and it wasn't through the lens particularly of Crybaby. It was my own lens.
Right.
And I have, a song about, breakups, or even just a personal song like Field Trip, which is, something I've never done before. Just like only purely write about like me and who I am as a person, which is, it's hard. I think it's hard after creating a character and writing through her eyes for so long. It was really hard to be vulnerable, but also very cathartic for me because I was expressing myself in a way that I hadn't ever done before.
What's left for you to do that you haven't done? I mean, I know there's projects that you want to do, but is there something, you're making films, so you're doing a lot of different things, acting, etc. But are there other things on the horizon for you that you kind of go like, "Boy, I'd like to move into and do some more of this," or different things that you've been thinking about?
Yeah, I always think about, wanting to, like, I really want to make a poetry and photography book one day, like with the both of them combined. I love photography. I love making, poems here and there. And so I would like to combine that. But also, like, I would love to start some sort of clothing line or something because I love designing. It's something that I could just do for hours when I'm just bored at home. Like, I'll just pull out my iPad and just start drawing a bunch of costumes. So there's a lot of things that I like that I'm probably going to start incorporating into certain projects and stuff in my life. But, obviously with making a film and making an album, those two things take priority for me.
And a bunch of time too. It's not. It takes some time to
Yeah,
put these things together. They don't happen overnight. Well,
it does. It takes a long time. Yeah.
now will it be easier the next time? Do you think you've learned enough from the first
I
time
hope
that?
so. I hope so. I hope so. You never know, right? I feel like
Right,
everything is different every time. Like, I
right,
want
right.
to say yes, it'll be easier because I know what I'm doing now, but then I'm also like, oh wow, like it's still, everything is I'm always trying to push myself to do something I haven't done before. So with that always comes this inevitable intimidation or this feeling of, oh my
Yeah.
God, this is so much. How am I going to get through this? You know,
Right.
but it's really exciting on the other end because you can look back at it and be like, wow, like I'm really proud of this, you know?
Yeah, when that stops, that's when you stop doing it, right? Like that's why you do it, is to get to the next
Yeah.
hurdle. As much as you might hate it in
Yeah.
the moment sometimes.
Yeah.
Uh,
Totally.
well, that's great. It's obviously it's great to hear some of your insights and learn more about what you do. Your artistry is, inevitable, but to hear kind of your process behind it is very interesting. And we appreciate you taking some time. And we're lucky enough you're going to perform a few songs for us too. So
Sure.
that's great. So everybody stay tuned for that. And Melanie, thanks again for taking the time to be with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Lovely talking with you.
You as well. Hopefully one day, maybe even in person, there'll be an audience in front of us like we
Yes,
normally do. Wouldn't that be
that'd be
amazing?
awesome.
That's great. Well, thank you. And thank you everybody for watching this episode of Behind the Song. Stay tuned for that performance. And until next time, I'm your host, Mark Conklin, encouraging you to make music and make a difference. And we'll see you next time.
I'm glued to the thoughts in my mind. They pester like arc in the sky. I am glued to the love in you. It swallows me whole, it hard to let go. Oh, that's not what I wanna do. Perfectly attached like a noodle in a soup. You're good with the X, Y, Z. I'm good with the A, B, C, and D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, baby. We all have a strong suits built differently. Different experience, different needs. I know we can't die at the same time, but please, I don't wanna think about the morbid parts of life no more. I'm trying just to focus on the things that hold me so damn close and sticky, stuck and solidly sealed up to this reality. I'm seeing not what I wish to be achieving. The old idea of me is glued up. Sometimes it's too much. I'm fucked up and clueless. Oh, glueless, and life would be boring, empty, but no hurting, no hurting. When my pretty feet start to sway, you better turn around the other way. But when the doubt starts creeping in, it's hard to let go of all instinctual patterns that I picked up from my environment. Since a baby, cut that negative self-talk and cut out my procrastination. Being sticky, stuck, glue those old habits shut. Pace me to a new way of being, something to breathe new life in me again. Glued up, sometimes it's too much. I'm fucked up and clueless. Clueless, oh, glueless. Life would be boring, empty, but no hurting. Hurting, glued up. Sometimes it's too much. I'm fucked up and clueless. Clueless, oh, glueless. Life would be boring, empty, but no hurting. No hurting, glued up. Sometimes it's too much. I'm fucked